St. Petersburg, on the coast of the Gulf of Finland, can rightly be called the Venice of the North, since like the Italian city, it was built on a lagoon made up of channels and tiny islands. The branches comprising the delta and the Neva River are linked by artificial channels. The full length of the waterways is 165 kilometers. Almost the entire huge city, including 44 various-sized islands, can be covered by boat. The basic area of the second largest city of Russia is 600 square kilometers, and the number of its inhabitants is approximately 5 million. City transport runs on 600 bridges, among them footbridges, vehicular bridges, and railway bridges. Some of them are open at night so that the huge ferries can pass through. Erwin Radványi wrote the following in Cities and Sagas. So much blood was shed for long centuries for this tiny northern part of the endless Russian land, where the opulent Neva River flows into the Gulf. On each other's trail, Swedish and German fleets continued eastward, down the cold, gray, glittering waters of the Baltic Sea, so that these foreign conquerors could gain footing on the ancient Russian area of Izhora. According to Peter I of Russia, this, with all its cities and settlements and every inch of its sod, had belonged to the Russian Empire since time began, and under no circumstances could foreign people rule it. Finally, the Tsar chased away the conquerors and opened a free way to the Baltic Sea. And at that moment, an excellent plan occurred to the iron-willed emperor. To create solid bastion walls, to build a uniquely rich and majestic city on the islands of the Bay of Neva, to ornament it with the most marvelous artworks of Baroque and Classicism, to let poetry and music, science and beauty meet in this city, and to have its harbor open a gate to the world. Here, on this place, let us open a window towards Europe. In the center, east of the Palace Square, stands one of the most beautiful churches of the city. The original name of the building adorning the bank of the Griboyedov Canal is the Church of the Resurrection of Jesus Christ. However, it's generally called Church of the Savior of Spilt Blood. Alexander II was assassinated here by a revolutionary terrorist group called Will of the People. His son, Alexander III, had an onion-domed old Russian-style church erected here, indicating in this way that he accused Western influence of the assassination. The very spectacular building with colorful domes resembles St. Basil's Cathedral in Moscow. We can see it on several covers of guidebooks and tourist-enticing brochures. The church, consecrated in 1907, was closed in Soviet times. Then it was renovated for decades, and it reopened in 1998. Its interior and exterior are covered with golden mosaics of 7,000 square meters. Parts of it were made by the famous tale illustrator Vaznetsov. Every square centimeter of the wall is covered with mosaics. There's no sign of Puritanism. The icons here don't hang framed on the walls, they cover the entire wall, and the artfully planned window openings always bathe the glory of different saints at various times of the day with golden sunshine. A memorial in honor of the murdered Tsar may be found in the historical building. Christ looks down on us from the cupola, his eyes following us wherever we go. Here he's a smooth-faced young boy whose countenance differs completely from the usual portraits of Christ. Both the appearance and principles of the Orthodox religion also differ from those of the Catholic Church in the West. Its center is still the Mount Athos Monastery. Earlier, Masses were only held in Greek, and the Russian, Greek, Turkish, Bulgarian, Roman, and Serbian Orthodox churches were under the jurisdiction of the Constantinople Patriarch, not the Pope. Since 1589, the Russian Orthodox Church has been independent, and since that time has used its own language in the liturgy. Its believers are the direct descendants of the ancient Christian religion and consider themselves the genuine protectors of the faith. Their churches are decorated with icons, a word which means picture or image, but actually holy likeness. The nave is separated from the altar by a wall which is covered with such pictures and is called iconostasis. In this respect, each and every wall of the Church of the Bleeding Savior is an iconostasis. The greatest icon painter was Andrei Rublev, whose masterpieces may be admired in Moscow, but there are also a few in the Russian Museum in St. Petersburg. The numerous sights of St. Petersburg attract huge crowds of people. Many of them are Russian tourists from within the country, but a lot of people come from the other former Soviet republics and even more visitors from other countries of the world. There are a lot of tourist groups, especially from Japan, England, France, and Germany. As everywhere in the world where significant income is expected from tourism, also in St. Petersburg, people strive to entertain visitors and create a positive image of the city and the country. More and more elegant sites are opening, the number of optional activities is growing, and even an authentic Eastern souvenir market has been opened where everything the tourist may long for can be bought, from the Order of Lenin to Matryoshka dolls, from fur ushanka caps to golden icons. Puppets were always main characters in old books of Russian fairy tales, as well as in cartoons. The decorated lacquered boxes and spoons are especially beautiful. Amber jewelry is reminiscent of the adventuresome history of the Amber Room in the city of Pushkin near St. Petersburg. The imitations of Fabergé eggs seem absolutely authentic. Those who plan in advance can buy painted wooden Christmas decorations with folk motifs. Particularly West Europeans are fond of soldiers' caps and space helmets. And coin and stamp collectors also won't leave empty-handed, and it's also worth looking around at the paintings, particularly the landscapes. Tsar Paul I had a castle built which became a military school and is still known as the Engineer's House. The statue of the unfortunate Paul I stands, or to be more precise, sits in the octagon-shaped inner courtyard. His death was mourned by only few in the empire. The Tsar had a deathly fear of being assassinated and had a genuine fortress built, complete with moat and drawbridge. The assassin didn't come from outside, though, but from within the court. Duke Zubov was the minion of Paul's mother, Catherine. Paul hadn't yet spent 2 months in the building, which is now home to the Russian Museum. The story circulates that its peculiar pinkish color was inspired by the gloves of one of the ladies-in-waiting. In defiance of his mother, Paul I had a statue of his great-grandfather, Peter the Great, put in front of the palace. Catherine refused to recognize Rastrelli's creation as an official monument and commissioned Falconet to build another, the meanwhile famous bronze horseman on the banks of the Neva. Today, we can have a look at both and decide for ourselves which one we prefer. St. Michael's Palace, decorated with Corinthian pillars, was designed by Carlo Rossi for the brother of Alexander I. As the art treasures could not be placed in the Hermitage Museum due to lack of space, the management of the museum decided to organize an independent exhibition of Russian artworks. Thus was born the Russian Museum, which later moved as a co-tenant together with the Ethnographic Museum into St. Michael's Palace. Besides the Tretyakov Gallery in Moscow, the richest Russian Soviet fine arts collection can be found here. The more than 300,000 artworks were grouped according to eras and styles, so every trend can be found here from the icons of Rublev to avant-garde. We can see portraits of rulers and politicians, as well as an ample still life collection with wooden houses, birch trees, and endless steppes, but there are several battle scenes too. Important historic events are commemorated by huge tabloids. Long lines of rooms show us portraits, still life, and genre pictures. The two-dimensional world of paintings is broken by statues. The inlaid floor, painted ceiling, golden doors, and carpeted walls of the palace provide a worthy backdrop for these artworks. The most beautiful pieces of Russian icon painting that looks back on a history of hundreds of years are exhibited here, some of which are the work of Andrei Rublev and his students. Everyone who saw the cult film of Andrei Tarkovsky, which won first prize at the Cannes Film Festival in 1969, remembers the name and life story of Rublev. Most of the big canvases evoke historic events, and several paintings illustrate ships, seas, and sea battles. It's of course not by accident that most of them are from the time of Peter I of Russia. Chaliapin was one of the world's greatest opera singers. Many were the painters who did his portrait, both privately and in costume. He was born at the turn of the century in a peasant family in Kazan. He not only became the celebrated bass of the Tsar's courtyard, but performed in all the great opera houses of the world. Portraits and statues immortalized a lot of famous people too. Members of the Tsarist family, aristocrats, politicians, artists. We can see the portraits of Chaliapin, the statue of Gogol, and almost all the pictures of the great Russian composers. Borodin, Rimsky-Korsakov, Mussorgsky, Glinka, and Stravinsky look down at us from the wall. Repin's picture, the Volga barge haulers, and the song Echochnyam, a Russian folk song, are inseparably interwoven. The tabloid depicting the Senate of the Tsarist court is simply amazing and was deservedly given a separate room in the museum. Every detail, every face, every gesture is in its place in this monumental work. Portraits of the representatives hang on the walls of rooms, which was the outline for the great painting. The observer is completely absorbed in this authentic, realistic work. Alexander Sergeyevich Pushkin is one of the most well-known Russian poets and playwrights. One of his statues stands in front of the Russian Museum, and even a metro station bears his name. The poet was born in 1799 in Moscow, in a noble family. One of his ancestors was African, about whom he wrote Peter the Great's Negro. The author of Boris Godunov, The Queen of Spades, The Captive of the Caucasus, and Eugene Onegin married a celebrated beauty, and this proved to be his downfall. In defense of the honor of his wife, he fought a duel with the French conquistador and was injured so badly that he died 2 days later. His former house is now a museum commemorating the poet. A statue of Pushkin stands in front of a painted background in a wooden booth at the station named after him. The underground of St. Petersburg is the deepest in the world because the tunnel was drilled into the solid earth under the soft, swampy part. It consists of 4 lines. Three curving but basically parallel canals facilitate water transport within the city: the Moiki, Griboyedov, and Fontaki. On the bank of all 3 canals, but chiefly at the bank of Moiki, 18th and 19th century palaces and residential colleges line up. The palaces were named after their builders and called the same way today as well. The Nevsky Prospect crosses the city between the Alexander Nevsky Monastery and the Admiralty. The Nevsky is the most well-known avenue and shopping street of the city. Throughout the years, many songs and poems were written about it. Keeping up with the times, we can find a Western-style shopping mall here as well, where residents of St. Petersburg, hungry for such things in the communist era, can choose among the most fashionable boutiques. Between shops, fast food restaurants and cafes offer refreshments, but of course at much greater expense than local eateries. Most foreigners are surprised that they can see so many luxurious cars in the streets of St. Petersburg, and that local people live much better than assumed. In the years when goods were not so readily available, there were long queues in front of the shops. Today, the crowd is smaller since shopping opportunities have expanded. Most people still do their shopping in the merchant courtyard opposite, which is a merchant and marketplace from 1761. It was designed by the Frenchman Vaillant de la Motte. Merchants of various goods offered their products in strictly separated lines, as Turkish and Arab merchants still do today. Approaching the Winter Palace, we can admire the castles of former aristocrats and wealthy merchants. For example, the Chicherin Palace, which was turned into the Creative House, or the Academy of Sciences, designed by Rezanov. The Palace Square, a masterpiece of usage of space, is living proof of the genius of the architect Carlo Rossi. In the middle of the huge semicircular facade of the building of the General Staff Headquarters stands a monumental triumphal arch. On its top, at the height of 28 meters, stands the statue of the Goddess of Victory. The triumphal arch is directly opposite the facade of the Winter Palace. A 50-meter-high granite column rises at its axle, which was erected in memory of the Russian victory over the troops of Napoleon. The 600-ton block is held only by its own weight. It's not even tipped from the volume of hammering rock music of concerts held here recently. The Winter Palace, made famous by the October Revolution, was built by Bartolomeo Rastrelli to the order of Elizabeth of Russia in Baroque style. As the emperor dismissed him, his work was finished by de la Motte and Rinaldi. The palace stretches on 3.5 hectares. Its 1,507 rooms, in which Catherine the Great and her court once lived, is now home to the Hermitage Museum. This is one of the biggest fine art collections of the world. In the meantime, the Little Hermitage, the Old Hermitage, and the New Hermitage belong to the building. Nevertheless, not all significant artworks can be shown to the guests. In fact, Hermitage is a French word that means hermitage, and as an 18th century fashionable architectural expression, it meant a place where one could find shelter to deliberate alone. This loneliness is impossible to find nowadays in the Hermitage. Visitors even have to book their tickets by phone or on the internet in advance to avoid long queuing. The half-completed palace was damaged by fire, and while the outside was redecorated according to the original designs, inside it became even more magnificent. The redecoration process was led by the best architects who employed 3,000 people at the same time. The marble colonnade of the main staircase linked by arches, the richly gilded stairway, the hall ornamented with mirrors and statues depicting the ancient deities, the stirring Baroque-style semi-precious stones, rooms covered with colorful Uralian marble, and decorated with carvings and wallpaper laced with gold, were completed in 15 months. Compared to other sterile museums where artworks hang on bare white walls, here the rooms, the walls, and the ceilings are also works of art. Ornate fireplaces can be found in the rooms, the frescoes are the works of famous artists, and gold-framed mirrors reflect the image of thousands of visitors. The collection was created on the initiative of Catherine the Great in the 1760s. Today, apart from Russian artwork, it consists of 2,700,000 artworks. It means that if we spend only 10 seconds on every object, it will take 3.5 years to finish our visit. Of course, it's worth it to choose just a few paintings which interest us the most and view them with the aid of the catalog by renting a Walkman or booking a tour with a guide. Only the mice and I are able to admire these brilliant creations, said Catherine the Great, who collected the most exquisite creations of the world for 30 years. Her minion, Duke Golitsyn, perused indefatigably the art treasure collections and auctions of Europe. Among the many masterpieces are paintings by Leonardo da Vinci and Tiziano, sculptures by Michelangelo, and pictures by El Greco, Van Dyck, Murillo, Goya, Velázquez, Tintoretto, Veronese, Rubens, and Rembrandt. In 1764, a collector from Berlin managed to buy 225 pictures before Friedrich of Prussia could do so. This collection consisted of 13 Rembrandts, 11 Rubens, 2 Raffaellos, and 2 Holbeins. The Flemish painters are exhibited in a separate room in the Hermitage, as are the French and Italians. The styles ranged from the Renaissance to Impressionism up to Cubism. During the Revolution, the collection grew immensely as a result of requisitions and nationalization, giving it a total of more than 10 times the size of the collection of the Louvre. The paintings are arranged according to period and style. Some foreign and Soviet Russian works are exhibited in the Russian Museum. There's a separate gallery of 300 portraits of soldiers waging war against Napoleon. In addition to the paintings, there's a rich collection of objects from ancient cultures in the Orient, Egypt, Babylon, Assyria, and classic antiquity. Greek culture is featured in 5 halls and Roman in 8. In addition to the culture of former Soviet satellite countries, there are also objects from China, India, and Japan. The collections of drawings, etchings, and medals are also impressive. The gold of the Scythians, the gold room, and the diamond room may only be viewed on previous notice and with a guide. Victor Wirdl wrote the following in his guidebook. A few years ago, there was a TV program showing the army of cats living in the cellar of the Hermitage. During the day, people deal specifically with them, but at night, they're released into the halls because these good Russian cats are the only ones who can rid the palace of its rats and mice. It seems Catherine the Great's complaint was justified. The paintings of the Impressionists Cézanne, Matisse, Monet, Degas, Gauguin, Renoir are among the most popular and are the result of the work of 2 collectors, Shchukin and Morozov. Picasso's work filled 2 halls. Besides Walkman, which can be rented, there are video guides in some of the halls. These built-in computers provide audio and video information about single works and artists. The Admiralty is located on the bank of the Neva in the Alexander Garden. It's the former site of the shipyard of Peter the Great. Its gold peak signifies the geographical center of the city, and the form is identical to the tower of the St. Peter and Paul Cathedral. The building visible today was built by Andrei Zakharov according to the designs of Alexander II. The main facade of the Classicist Palace is 407 meters long. In the park in front still stands the oak tree, which was planted personally by the Tsar. Today, the building serves as a naval college. We go on by boat through the Moiki Canal to the foot of the Blue Bridge, from where we can see the equestrian statue of Nicholas I. The square forms a triangle with the Decembrist Prospect and the Vosnesensky Prospect. The dome of St. Isaac Cathedral really stands out of the surroundings. The end of St. Isaac's Square at the Horsefield is so wide that we don't even realize that we're actually standing on a bridge. This is the Blue Bridge that was named after the colors of its iron supports. In the middle of the square, the statue of Nicholas I faces the dome. The bronze statue is the work of Peter Clote, and the granite base decorated with sculptures and embossments was made by Montferrand. The embossments depict scenes from the life of the ruler. The 4 female figures symbolize faith, strength, wisdom, and truth. St. Isaac Cathedral is one of the biggest domes in the world. The copper plates covering the dome are riveted by gold weighing 100 kilograms. Gold doesn't tarnish, so the dome shines like a lighthouse in sunny weather. First, Peter the Great built a church here in honor of St. Isaac from Dalmatia, because his birthday was on the same day as the holiday of the saint. The present cathedral, consecrated in 1858, is the third one at this place. It was designed by Auguste Montferrand, whose other works can also be seen in the city. When Alexander II asked him to design the building, he was an ambitious and talented architect, but young and inexperienced at the same time. Maybe that's why that despite the abundant financial resources, the work took 40 years to complete. The building started the same way as those of the Venetian churches. 23,000 hardwood piles were hammered down into the swampy soil. These were to ensure the stability of the enormous weight of the massive building. The facade comprises 48 granite columns weighing 114 tons each, and the dome is held by 24 granite columns weighing a total of 67 tons. Moreover, these had to be raised to a height of 43 meters. Explanatory charts and models were exhibited about the enormous construction site. The inside of the church was ornamented with 3 quintals gold and semi-precious stones. Its 9.5-meter-high iconostasis was made of Carrara marble. The price of the gold used in the building exceeded the costs of the French-Prussian War. The cathedral is further ornamented with 300 statues. The 800-square-meter dome fresco is the artwork of Brulot and Bruni. The faces of the golden saints are portraits of the members of the Romanov family. Actually, they weren't unanimously considered saints because the iconostasis was covered in Soviet times. The rest of the beauties, however, were open to the public. The cathedral operated as a museum for decades, and then it was consecrated again by the Metropolitan of the Russian Orthodox Church in 1990. The terrace under the dome functions as a lookout turret. The panorama is worth both the long queuing and the tiring climb. You can scarcely find a city with as many weddings as St. Petersburg. The young couples take advantage of the good weather, and for the sake of tradition, they go out to the Bronze Horseman for a photo session. Many of them like to place their honeymoon during the romantic white nights, which is the height of wedding season. Everywhere you can see snow-white cars adorned with flowers, and the dresses of the happy brides are just as snow-white. The Bronze Horseman is the work of Etienne Falconet and Marie-Annette Collot. It was erected by Catherine II for the anniversary of Peter the Great's coming to the throne. The 1,600-ton granite block, which functions as a pedestal, was carried from Karelia by boat. The former Tsarist riding hall that resembles a Greek colonnade stands on Vosnesensky Prospect. In its neighborhood, the former palace of the Senate and Synod can be found, in which municipal offices operate nowadays. From Pushkin's The Bronze Horseman, where lonely waters struggling sought to reach the sea, he paused in thought, immersed and gazed ahead. A century passed, and there it stood, of northern lands the pride and beauty, a young, resplendent, gracious city, sprung out the dark of mire and wood, to cast his worn, much-mended net into the turbid, mysterious waters. Now there rise great palaces and towers, a maze of sails and mastheads crowds the harbor. Ships of all ports moor here beside these rich and peopled shores. The attraction of Teatralnia Square is the Opera and Ballet House. This was the place of the first performance of most of the works of Glinka, Mussorgsky, Borodin, and Tchaikovsky. In the theater that can seat 1,700 people, there's an exhibition commemorating Anna Pavlovna and Fyodor Shchelyapin, and a statue of Glinka standing in front of them. St. Nicholas was the patron saint of sailors. Therefore, the church near the Naval Museum was named after him. The beautiful Baroque building was created on the grounds of the designs of Shevakinsky, who cooperated in designing New Hollandia. Its facade and bell tower are divided by Dorian pillars, which are plastically highlighted from the blue background. The church, with its color and onion dome, resembles the Smolny. The 18th century sacred wall belongs to the most beautiful ones in the country. We go southwest on the Griboyev Canal by boat. The iron bars running along the bank of the canal are the works of local masters and contribute to the atmosphere of the city. The Narva Gate once stood at the edge of the city. It was erected in honor of the Russian troops that had defeated Napoleon, based on the designs of Stasov. The Baroque work is decorated with 12 Corinthian pillars and 12 statues. On the frontispiece stand the allegorical statues of peace and victory. The times and places of the most significant battles have been engraved on the marble plate. The red brick building group of Vaillant de la Motte, the New Hollandia, was built near the shipyard in a triangle enclosed by canals. The building of romantic appearance, but quite prosaic function, was once a timber yard. Its name has remained from the time of Peter the Great, when a building called Holland Hut stood on this place. The group of buildings that is the property of the Navy will be used for cultural purposes in the future. From here, the shipyard and the delta of the Great Neva is not far away. We can see Vasily Island with the dome of the Uspensky Cathedral and with the building of the university under General Schmidt Bridge on the left, while on the right, the Bronze Horseman and the Admiralty appear. St. Petersburg is said to stand on the bones of its builders, which is true. 30,000 of the workers died at the construction site due to wretched working conditions, accidents, and epidemics in the swampy area. The work started in 1703 after the expulsion of the Swedes, first by building the Peter Paul fortress, and 9 years later, most of the palaces that can be seen today already existed. Several foreign, especially Italian and French masters, took part in the designing. The designing and building of the city was directed by the Tsar himself. The city of Peter the Great was the capital city of the Russian Empire between 1712 and 1917, a worthy competitor of Moscow. It was called Leningrad in Soviet times and got its original name back only under the presidency of Gorbachev. Vasily Island has been fully devoted to sciences. Besides the university, the Academy of Sciences, research centers, museums, libraries, and archives are located here. St. Petersburg is a real water city, which is shown not only by the sailboats on the river, but the coat of arms of Peter the Great, which has a three-master on it. This sailboat was made in the form of a statue as a fountain, which stands in front of Aurora, at the foot of a hotel. In front of the Peter Paul fortress, Vasily Island divides the Great Neva and the Little Neva. The peak of the island is called Strelka. The rostrum pillars stand on this, which are lighthouses based on the designs of a Swiss architect. Their eponymous ornaments are bronze bows of boats that refer to ancient Roman traditions. After a sea battle, the bows of the defeated ships were cut and shown as a trophy. In front of them, the spray of a fountain spouts into the river. The little island south of the Strelka is the core of the old town, on which stands the Peter Paul Fortress and the cathedral of the same name. The banks of the Great Neva are often used by locals as a beach in summer. Young people especially like the little island of the Peter Paul Fortress and the area of the St. John Bridge that leads there. The temperature of the water rarely goes beyond 20 degrees Celsius, and it's not as clean as it used to be. Nevertheless, people in Petersburg don't give up swimming in it. The history of the fortress goes back to the war against the Swedes, when fortified banks already stood there. The wooden ramparts were soon changed to stone walls, and according to the designs of Domenico Trezzini, the walls and bastions of the fortress were gradually outlined. It's the irony of history that until there was a desperate need for a fortress, defenders had to fight from behind banks. However, by the time the fortress group, ideal from every perspective, had been built, it was not necessary anymore. Therefore, the prison of Tsarist times was built here. First, the brother of Peter the Great, Alexei, was a captive here, but there were other famous guests too, for example, Dostoevsky, Trotsky, and Gorky. From among the strict walls, the Peter Paul Cathedral rises and shines. It's also the work of Trezzini. An angel balances on the pin of a golden needle. The peak is 122.5 meters high, because it was the explicit order of Peter the Great that it be higher than the bell tower of the Kremlin in Moscow. The site of the Baroque temple hall is the crypt where Peter and his descendants are buried. Moreover, the last members of the Romanov family, as well as Nicholas II and his family, executed in 1918, are also buried here. The cannon shot thunders in the fortress every day, to which people can set their watches. The Semyakin statue standing next to the cathedral is believed to bring luck if superstitious people sit in its lap. Many of them even queue to do this and have their photographs taken. We can find the boathouse at the western entrance of the cathedral, in which the 6-meter-long wooden boat of Peter I is kept. The boat was originally his grandfather's, and the Tsar studied the tricks of sailing on it. Troitskaya, or Trinity Square, lies east of the fortress that stretches up to Peter's cabin. A nice chapel stands in the park. In front of it, an old sailboat, which has been operating as a restaurant. Supply was not smooth even in the years of perestroika, and most of the catering industry could not operate efficiently. By today, however, Russia, and St. Petersburg especially, is catching up to the level of the former communist countries at an incredible speed. We can find several excellent restaurants in the city, which are not always cheap, but worthily represent fantastic Russian cuisine, such as this Three Master, which is frequently visited by locals and tourists as well. From on board, we can look at the Summer Garden, which is mainly famous for its wrought iron fence designed by Yuri Veltin. The English would have liked to purchase the fence, but the Russians wouldn't sell it for all the tea in China. Peter's cabin was built directly on the banks of the Neva. The founder of the city certainly grew up in modest surroundings in this little hut, which has since been surrounded by a brick building in order to protect the hut from the extreme weather conditions. The Tsar's furniture and various personal objects may be seen in the commemorative room. The clashing of the motorized 21st century and the Orthodox religion is unusual. The priest blesses the brand new car in the hopes of protecting those who are in it from accidents. The famous Aurora battlecruiser lies at anchor at Petrovskaya Quay, at the junction of two river arms. On the other side of the river stands the modern St. Petersburg Hotel, which opened in 1970. From the otherwise not very nice hotel, a beautiful panorama opens up to guests who look out the windows. Those living here can wake up every morning to see the Aurora cruiser. The battlecruiser, having preserved its original equipment, has been a free museum since 1956. The 6,700-ton and 124-meter-long ship was built in St. Petersburg in the buildings of the New Admiralty from 1897, and it was put to water in 1900. Its name, which means dawn, was given for the ship that was sunk at Kamchatka Peninsula in 1854. Its designer was Tokarev. It was first used in the Russian-Japanese War in the Battle of Tsushima. Captain Yegoriev and his 12 bluejackets died in the battle which the Japanese won by overpowering the Russians. After the compulsory pause on the Philippines, the ship returned back to St. Petersburg only 1 year later. From the beginning of World War I, it fought in the Finnish Gulf. In 1917, its bluejackets got into contact with the revolutionists and rebelled. The captain gave the order to shoot at the sailors, and then the revolutionists arrested the captain and his officers and took power over the cruiser. On the 25th of October, at 9:40 in the evening, the shot of the 6-inch cannon of the cruiser gave the sign for the siege of the Winter Palace. The next day, Lenin let the world know by Morse code that the temporary government had failed and the Soviet power had won. The Aurora served in the fleet until 1922. From 1923, it was a school ship and returned to active service only in World War II. Its heavy cannons attacked the Air Force of the enemy. It cast anchor at its present place in 1948 in front of the Naval High School named after Admiral Nakhimov, hero of the Crimean War. The interior of the ship looks as if the sailors had only left yesterday. We can have a look at their accommodations with their hammocks and their sea chests, and we can also see the pictures of the former crew. The Aurora had 570 people in service at one time. They haven't removed the weapons either, just unloaded them. These include 8 152mm, 22 75mm weapons, 2 cannons, and 3 torpedo shooters. Behind the ship in the park, a memorial to the 300th anniversary of the fleet may be seen. Although today there is no such Lenin cult as during the Soviet period, there are still a few statues of him in the city. Yevseyev's statue of Lenin was placed in front of the Finn railway station where he first addressed the public after a long emigration. Yet today, parked on one of the side tracks of the station, we may see the number 293 steam engine on which Lenin returned to St. Petersburg in order to lead the armed revolt. Originally built in 1870, the railway station was transformed into a modern concrete and glass building, the same time as the square with a fountain and a statue in the center. The name Smolny was given after the tar which was boiled here for shipbuilding, but it got its fame from Lenin, who established his working room here during the Revolution. The group of buildings that was originally meant to be a monastery was never used for that purpose. According to legend, this was because a priest hanged himself here and hereby desecrated the building. Tsarina Elizabeth entrusted Rastrelli, her court architect, with building the Baroque monastery. According to her plans, she would have retired here in her old years. However, she didn't live to see the completion of the building. Her successor, Catherine II, had an educational center for girls of the nobility created here. It was the first building of this kind in Russia and was in operation till 1917. The walls enclose a square yard at the corners of which there's a tower. The onion-domed cathedral was finally finished by architect Stasov. The dome of the middle tower is 85 meters high. Today, the office of the mayor and other officials are located in Smolny. Alexander Yaroslavich was given the nickname Nevsky after his victory against the Swedes at the bank of Neva. Alexander Nevsky Monastery was founded by Peter the Great, who respected his predecessor, the sainted general, very much. The two oldest graveyards of the city, Lazarus and Kivin, were created at the two sides of the monastery. The latter is called the Necropolis of Artists. Among many other famous people, Dostoevsky, outstanding members of the University of Petersburg and the Academy, moreover some actors, directors, and dancers were laid to rest here. Among composers, the gravestones of Mussorgsky, Borodin, Rimsky-Korsakov, Rubinstein, Glinka, Tchaikovsky, and Stravinsky are worth mentioning. The relics of Alexander Nevsky are kept in the oldest building of the monastic group, the Church of the Immaculate Conception. The poet Gnedich saw the White Nights this way. It's summer, beauteous golden tide, when daylight thieves the empery of night. Strangers here are enchained by northern sky. Its sweet light, crystal shades charm, cause never saw the southern blue sky such blaze and brightness. Night doesn't bespread Neva and splendid Petersburg with veil, and night is falling without shade. During the White Nights, several kinds of artistic festivals are presented. They wouldn't be complete without Russian folk dance and music. Kalinka, Cossack dance, or the performance of the band Birchwood is familiar to everyone from television. Similar performances of singers and dancers in fabulous dresses may be seen during these festivals. Spectators are offered Russian champagne in the break, while couples in period dress dance for them. Late at night, the bridges of the Great Neva are opened so that ferries docked there all day can sail to the sea. This time, when not even the underground works, we can get to the other bank of the Neva only on a long bypass road or not at all. It should be taken into consideration by tourists when organizing their evening activities as well. We visit the Finnish Gulf, southwest of the city. Petersburg was the summer palace of Peter the Great, which is not a castle, but a real group of palaces with splendid buildings and an enormous park. It was built on the shore of the Finnish Gulf, approximately 30 kilometers from the city center. We can visit the place not only by car, bus, or local railway, but by pleasure boat or hydrofoil too, which start from in front of the Winter Palace at the quay of the Neva. The museum was set up in the central building of the palace. The first palace was created to the order of Peter the Great in 1723. The imposing artwork of Jean-Baptiste Leblanc and Niccolò Michetti was not found luxurious enough by Tsarina Elizabeth a couple of decades later. Therefore, she had it altered by her court architect Rastrelli. The present-day 300-meter wide facade of the palace was completed by 1752. The building is characterized by classicist and Baroque features. On the facade facing the Gulf, the monotonous surface of the wall is broken by spectacular friezes and pilasters. The interior design cannot be attached to only one name either. However, we have to highlight Yuri Feldin, who created the throne room and the white dining room. According to Lunacharsky, the Russian Versailles is the pearl of the arts. Every inch of Petersburg is enthralling. However, the most interesting about it is its rebirth. The whole group, including the park and the fountains, was first robbed, then it was flattened by the fascist troops of Hitler. Ilya Ehrenburg wrote in his novel Stalingrad, "We look at the ruins of palaces in Peterhof with heavy heart. These cannot be rebuilt. The palace in Peterhof is far gone. It's better to leave it as a majestic ruin, just like the ruins of the Acropolis, to remind successors of the creative imagination of the builders and the barbarism of the fascists." 3,000 trees died in the garden of Peterhof Palace. The park thinned away like Europe. Everything had to be started from the beginning. Based on contemporary drawings, descriptions, pictures, and later photographs, as well as by the help of witnesses, the houses were not only rebuilt the same way as they used to be, but also were furnished this way. All of the gildings, frescoes, carvings, Gobelin tapestries, wall carpets, and stove tiles accord with the original ones. After the war, several treasuries and pictures were brought back, but those that were not were replaced by contemporary pieces from other museums and palaces. There was not another place where restorers did such an enormous work. The central palace of the 800-hectare area stands on an 18-meter-high hill, with its front facade facing the sea. The 100-hectare lower park also stretches towards the sea. Slope and gravity play an important role here, since the amazing fountain specialties are operated by the fall and power of water too, without the use of any electronic or mechanic pumping installation. Water comes from the Ropshai and Kipeni prominence from a distance of 22 kilometers and a height of 100 meters. The system was designed by Vasily Tuvolkov in 1735 and has been working without any difficulties since then. In the 102-hectare lower park, the biggest and most spectacular fountain system of the world is in operation. Although we can find similar ones, for instance, in Austria in Mirabell Castle near Salzburg, Petrodoretz is bigger both in square meters and the number of fountains. 140 apparatus eject nearly 100,000 cubic meters of water a day. The symmetric central cascade consists of 17 stairs and is decorated with 39 golden statues and several embossments. The large quantity of water is let into the sea in a channel dividing the eastern and western part of the lower park. Peter the Great intended to symbolize the naval power he acquired from the Swedes with grandeur and luxury. Petrodoretz openly wanted to imitate Versailles and was meant to refer to victory over the Swedes with the golden statue of Samson defeating the lion barehanded. The 5-ton artwork was done by master sculptor Kozlovsky for the 25th anniversary of the battle. A 20-meter-high water jet surges out of the mouth of the lion. Apart from the terrace central fountain, the park, involving 20 smaller buildings, has other spectacular sights too. Due to the enormous size of the park, it's possible to rent bicycle rickshaws, which make traveling more comfortable. The favorite of Peter was the Mont Plaisir right next to the sea, offering a beautiful panorama over the Gulf. The ruler preferred to spend his time here, and it was here that he set up the gallery with his favorite works and received his closest acquaintances, saving the throne room of the great palace for ambassadors and other official visitors. On the seashore is a statue which was supposedly made by Peter himself. Russians consider it a lucky charm, and tourists are also fond of rubbing its feet. Marly Palace served as accommodation for guests while invited artists, whether painters, sculptors, poets, or musicians, were housed in the small Hermitage of Petrodoretz. The style of the palaces and gardens, including their names, demonstrates how closely the Tsar's court followed the French model for a long time in every aspect. Of course, the fact that French became the official language of diplomacy also played a large role in this. Russian gastronomy also has a lot for which to thank the French. A particular specialty of the long and glorious meals was the oval dining table. The center of this table was lowered into the kitchen, where they loaded it with all the wonders of the earth, then raised it again to the dining room. Originally, people were also transported by lift. When Paul I once fell into the elevator shaft, he terminated its usage in his rage and built stairs in its place. The joyful fountains sprinkle the unsuspecting guests if they step on the wrong stone. The dreamer of Petrodoretz, Peter the Great, the Tsar of all Russians, was a controversial personality. He was more than 2 meters tall, with an impressive appearance. He was a real reformer who spared neither himself nor his vassals in order to achieve his great goals. He was a determined patriot, but a feudal despot. During his long journeys abroad, he gained a lot of experience and learned the profession of a ship's carpenter. The building up of St. Petersburg served not only his own ambitions and vanity, he firmly believed in the European Russia. As a general, he created a Western-type army and a combat-ready fleet. As a ruler, he was a strong advocate of educating aristocratic children, and he considered technical development important. As a vain person, he urged the building up of St. Petersburg and its surroundings because, among many other factors, he saw the survival of his name and his work to be ensured in this way. Pushkin can be found south of Petersburg. Although the city of Pushkin has been bearing this name since 1937, the 100th anniversary of the death of the poet, it's better known as Tsarskoye Selo, namely Tsarist village. As far as the style and interior decorating of the residence is concerned, it resembles Petersburg, only the fountains are missing. The territory was given to Catherine, the wife of Peter the Great, as a present, and she commissioned the best masters of the age to design a palace for her. Braunstein, Förster, Zemtsov, and Kvasov began the work, which was continued by Rastrelli from 1751. Two larger palaces, the Catherine and Alexander palaces, stand on the area on a well-separated part of the park. The most spectacular sight of Pushkin town is the Catherine Palace. It's 306 meters long. Its two-storied facade was painted blue and white and decorated with numerous gilts. Its tympana are held by Corinthian pillars. The balcony above the main entrance is held by a pair of pillars and is decorated with Baroque statues. The style of the interesting building is basically Baroque, but it's colored by Classicist elements as well. The palace has three very famous rooms. The Great Hall measures 900 square meters. Its faceted mirrors reflect sunshine flowing in through the huge windows, and in the dark, the light of the 56 wall brackets and chandeliers. The natural green gypsum stucco dining room with inlaid timber is also very nice. The most remarkable is the amber room. Its 50 square meter wall covering was carved from amber by Prussian and Danish masters for Frederick I of Prussia. The so-called Soldier King passionately collected warriors for his army who were taller than the average. He exchanged the amber room, which was extremely valuable even at that time, for 55 well-built soldiers of the Tsarist Guard. Tsar Peter had the treasury transferred to Petersburg, which after his death was taken to the Winter Palace. To the order of Tsarina Elizabeth, it was built in the Katerina Palace by Rastrelli in 1755, where he doubled the surface of amber with mirrors and inlays made of semi-precious stones. The room's rugged fate was culminated in 1941, when art treasure robbers of the Wehrmacht took it apart, put the pieces on a train, then transferred them to Königsberg, where its trace was lost. From 1979, people have tried to rebuild it. The work, due to lack of money, was suspended numerous times. Finally, the donation of $3.5 million by a German company made it possible for Russian President Putin and Chancellor Schröder to dedicate this genuine jewel on the 300th anniversary of the establishment of St. Petersburg. Pushkin attended the Lyceum here and wrote the following about Tsarskoye Selo. From the hill glinting from a distance, pearl waterfalls are tumbling. Naiads are bathing in the quiet, clear lake and floating on the lazy water. There up to the sky, high walls rise like white looming pillars of the clouds. Is this the home of earthly gods and the temple of the Russian Minerva? The first railway of Russia linked St. Petersburg with Tsarskoye Selo and Pavlovsk. Next to the railway station, a music pavilion was built where famous musicians of the times played. Schumann and Ferenc Liszt had concerts here, and Chelyabin sang. Johann Strauss and his orchestra, standing in the service of the Tsars for 15 years, entertained high-ranking visitors with their music, while the VIPs climbed into their troikas. The statue of the musician standing here commemorates this event. According to Gleb Botkin, Tsarskoye Selo is a lonely, strange world, the empire of fairy tales. Amber carving masters still work in the palace today. Souvenirs made by them can be bought in the museum shop. They carve jewelry in front of us from the hardened resin of ancient pine trees. In the layers created in the place of former pine trees, yellow or brownish amber stones can be found in groups or scattered. The quarry that has been known for the longest time in Europe is the area of the Baltic Sea in Germany. Material of the amber room also comes from here. We aren't allowed to take the room home, even in a picture, since photographing and recording is strictly forbidden, but some smaller parts can be reminiscent of our visit even at home. In the city of Pushkin, we find a wooden house in Russian folk style where tourist groups may have lunch or dinner. On the menu are zakuski, which are small appetizers. Of course, Russian caviar is among them. This is followed by a soup, more than likely borscht, shi, or solyanka. The main course is meat or fish, and the dessert, ice cream or blini, which is a kind of crepe which can be sweet or savory. And all this should be washed down with Russian champagne. Pavlovsk is separated from Pushkin only by the railway. Catherine the Great gave the territory to her son Paul, who loved hunting here, in the thick forests of the river Slavyanka. As court hunting couldn't exist without luxurious formalities, Paul soon had a castle erected here. The designs were made by the Scottish architect Cameron, who had also taken part in the rebuilding of Tsarskoye Selo. The crescent-shaped castle of Pavlovsk is different from the palaces of Peterhof and Pushkin both inside and outside. Certain rooms of the classicist building are decorated with Egyptian, Greek, and Roman motifs. The furnishing is not as uniform as in the two other residences, but it's lively and bright. Paul made Pavlovsk his official summer residence, which has become famous also for literary evenings and readings held here. The grounds of 600 hectares, however, were only really finished after Paul's death. His widow entrusted the Italian Pietro Gonzaga with the design of the garden and the nearly 60 smaller buildings on its territory. Yet today it's considered one of the most beautiful gardens in Europe. It's a protected area and differs greatly from many artificial parks. It's worth it to have a look at the masterpieces of Cameron, Rossi, and Gonzaga, the Temple of Friendship, the Pavilion of the Three Graces, the Mausoleum, the Rossi Arbor, the Visconti Bridge, and the Peel Tower. A. Ignatiev, officer of the Tsarist Guard, described a court ball. I arrived among the first. Court footmen wearing red tuxedos embroidered with gold were still running up and down on staircases covered by thick carpet, dropping court perfume on blazing wrought iron shovels so that the special palace smell could spread in the rooms. The middle chandelier was not yet lit in the great hall. In the corner, musicians of the court orchestra wearing red tuxedos were comfortably arranging their instruments. Guests gradually started to gather around. The crystal of the chandelier was shining in every color of the rainbow due to the light of thousands of lamps. The buffet, on the high bar counters of which bottles of champagne, cranberry syrup, almond milk, and trays loaded with fruit, cakes from the local confectionery, and bonbons lined up, was opened in the hall opposite the room. Such delicacies were sold nowhere else, so everyone strove to take some sweets home. Later, most of the officers urged the ladies and mistresses to dance as soon as possible. The hustle and bustle was growing, and it became more and more difficult to force one's way through this colorful and elegant crowd. In front of the doors, where members of the Tsarist family were supposed to enter the room, high-ranking court cortege gathered. Everything followed the planned order of the ball. The master of ceremonies knocked with his rod. There was a deadly silence in a moment, and through the doors, opened by a Negro, filed in the Tsarist family, led by the Tsar and Tsarina. I served for 7 years in the regiment and knew well every court reception, therefore started a conversation with the lady who raised my interest. However, most of the guests pushed forward to see the traditional polonaise with which the ball started. In the park, there's a statue of Eros, just like at Piccadilly Circus in London. The beloved celebration of the young, school graduates, and lovers is held at the beginning of summer, when the famous white nights create a romantic atmosphere anyway. Alexander Grin wrote a romantic story about a girl who from her childhood dreamt about a prince who doesn't come on a white horse, but in a sailboat, not just any kind, but on one that has scarlet sails. The celebration of scarlet sails revives this story. This is when the young people finishing their secondary school education come of age and can drink alcohol legally. So they set off in groups or in pairs with a bottle of champagne in their hands and walk on the bank of the Neva in the looming light of the night. It becomes a great public celebration, also because the dramatized version of this fabulous story is presented on the large open-air stage in front of the Winter Palace with the accompaniment of a symphony orchestra, acrobats hanging on rubber ropes, and ballet dancers. The 7-meter-high torch flames of the rostrum pillars are lit, and at dawn, when the shortest night of the year covers up the city, unparalleled fireworks begin.